What is going on, everybody? I just decided to read this. It's like 4 pages of the Federal Reserve Act, Section 16, because it's extremely important for everybody to know this. Most people will not read this, and that's fine, to each their own. It's just very important to know and to just read, okay? I've read this many times before, but again, it's something you definitely should read, okay? So I just decided, let me take you guys through it and read it, all right? Please do share, like, and follow if you're not. My name is Alexandra, and, I usually go live on Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, go follow me on there as well. But yeah, I just figured I would do something different, and just read. I mean, I've been kind of doing it lately, but let's go. Anyway, so let's start. So this is Federal Reserve Act, Section 16, note issues. So number 1, issuance of Federal Reserve notes, nature of obligation, where redeemable. Federal Reserve notes to be issued at the discretion of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System for the purpose of making advances to Federal Reserve banks through the Federal Reserve agents as hereafter set forth, and no other purpose are hereby authorized. The said notes shall be obligations of the United States and shall be, my page is cut off, but be received by all national and member banks and Federal Reserve banks, and for all taxes, customs, and other public dues. They are to be redeemed in lawful money on demand at the Treasury Department of the United States in the city of Washington, District of Columbia, or at any Federal Reserve Bank. Number 2, application for notes by Federal Reserve banks. Any Federal Reserve Bank may make application to the local Federal Register. Excuse me. Let me read that again. I'm sorry. Any Federal Reserve Bank may make application to the local Federal Reserve agent for such amount of the Federal Reserve notes herein before provided for as it may require. Such application shall be accompanied with tender to the local Federal Reserve agent of collateral in amount equal to the sum of Federal Reserve notes thus applied for, issued pursuant to such application. The collateral security thus offered shall be notes, drafts, bills of exchange, or acceptances acquired under Section 10A, 10B, 13, or 13A of this Act, or bills of exchange endorsed by a member bank or any Federal Reserve district and purchased under the provisions of Section 14 of this Act, or bankers' acceptances. One moment. Bankers' acceptances. All right. Purchased under the provisions of said Section 14, or gold certificates, or special drawing right certificates, or any other obligations which are direct obligations of or are fully granted as to principal and interest by the United States or any wait, I'm sorry. I'm trying to read off of this paper I printed out, but it's a bit cut off. I probably should let me use my phone. Hold on one second. Cause even by one word, I don't want to mess it up. I have my other phone here. Let me just give me one moment. I apologize. Hold on. Literally 30 seconds. All right, I got it. All right, so where was I? Okay. Okay, so or special drawing rights certificates or any obligations which are direct obligations of or are fully guaranteed as to principal and interest by the United States. No, I'm not going to be doing it live with others while I'm reading. I apologize. I'm not trying to be rude, but not doing that right now. I'm trying to read. So, maybe later on. Where was I? The United States or any agency thereof or assets that Federal Reserve banks may purchase or hold under Section 14 of this Act or any other asset of a Federal Reserve Bank, in no event shall such collateral security be less than the amount of Federal Reserve notes applied for. The Federal Reserve agent shall each day notify the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System of all issues and withdrawals of Federal Reserve notes to and by the Federal Reserve Bank to which he is accredited. The said Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System may at any time call upon a Federal Reserve Bank for additional security to protect the Federal Reserve notes issued to it. Collateral shall not be required for Federal Reserve notes which are held in the vaults, of or are otherwise held by or on behalf of Federal Reserve banks. Now, number 3, distinctive letter on notes, destruction or of unfit notes. Federal Reserve notes shall bear upon their faces a distinctive letter and serial number which shall be assigned by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System to each Federal Reserve Bank. Federal Reserve notes unfit for circulation shall be canceled, destroyed, and accounted for under procedures prescribed at locations designated by the Secretary of the Treasury. Upon destruction of such notes, credit with respect thereto shall be apportioned among the 12 Federal Reserve banks as determined by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. Number 4, granting right to issue notes. The Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System shall have the right, acting through the Federal Reserve agent. By the way, we are the Federal Reserve agent, just FYI for those of you that don't know. We are the Federal Reserve agent, okay? That's a must to know. Most people obviously don't know, but we are the Federal Reserve agent. All right, let me continue. To grant in whole or in part, or to reject entirely the application of any Federal Reserve Bank for the Federal Reserve notes, but to the extent that such application may be granted to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System shall, through its local Federal Reserve agent, supply Federal Reserve notes to the banks so applying, and such bank shall be charged with the amount of notes issued to it, and shall pay such rate of interest as may be established by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System on only that amount of such notes which equals the total amount of its outstanding Federal Reserve notes, less the amount of gold certificates held by the Federal Reserve agent as collateral security. Federal Reserve notes issued to any such bank shall, upon delivery, together with such notes of such Federal Reserve Bank as may be issued under Section 18 of this Act upon security of the United States 2 per sanctum government bonds, become a first and paramount lien on all assets of such bank. All right, now, number 5, and again, for those just joining, we are reading Federal Reserve Section 16 note issues. We're at Part 5 of Federal Reserve Act Section 16. 5. Deposit to reduce liability for outstanding notes. Any Federal Reserve Bank may at any time reduce its liability for outstanding Federal Reserve notes by depositing with the Federal Reserve agent its Federal Reserve notes, gold certificates, special drawing rights certificates, or lawful money of the United States. Federal Reserve notes so deposited shall not be reissued except upon compliance with the conditions of an original issue. The liability of a Federal Reserve Bank with respect to its outstanding Federal Reserve notes shall be reduced by any amount paid by such bank to the Secretary of Treasury under Section 4 of the Old Series Currency Adjustment Act. Now, for those of you that know or maybe don't know, the only real true lawful money is obviously gold, silver, and I mean there's a few of them. I believe stamps too. That's real lawful money. So, Section 16, and by the way, if you guys don't know what a Federal Reserve note is, that means the United States dollars, but the proper term is FRN, which is a Federal Reserve note. Again, most people that even use the dollar every day don't know these things, but you guys definitely should. So, anyways, continuing on. Number 6, substitution of collateral. Retirement of Federal Reserve notes. Any Federal Reserve Bank may, as its discretion, withdraw collateral deposited with the local Federal Reserve agent for the protection of its Federal Reserve notes issued to it, and shall at the same time substitute therefor other collateral of equal amount with the approval of the Federal Reserve agent under regulations to be prescribed by the by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. Any Federal Reserve Bank may retire any of its Federal Reserve notes by depositing them with the Federal Reserve agent or with the Treasurer of the United States. And such Federal Reserve Bank shall thereupon be entitled to receive back the collateral deposited with the Federal Reserve agent for the security of such notes. Any Federal Reserve Bank shall further be entitled to receive back the collateral deposited with the Federal Reserve agent for the security of any notes with the respect to which such bank has made payment to the Secretary of Treasury under Section 4 of the Old Series Currency Adjustment Act. Federal Reserve notes so deposited shall not be reissued except upon compliance with the conditions of an original issue. So the thing is here, they really are telling you that, they're literally getting the collateral. I'm sorry, you're putting up the collateral always, and they're getting, the interest no matter what, obviously. But it's just interesting because they really do tell you everything. So I'm going to just continue reading. So this is, again, for those of you joining, Section 16 of the this is the Federal Reserve Act, Section 16, and now we're at number 7. Custody of reserve notes, gold certificates, and lawful money. All Federal Reserve notes and all gold certificates, special drawing rights certificates, and lawful money issued to or deposited with any Federal Reserve agent under the provisions of the Federal Reserve Act shall hereafter be held for such agent under such rules and regulations as the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System may prescribe, in the joint custody of himself and the Federal Reserve Bank, to which he is accredited. Such agent and such Federal Reserve Bank shall be jointly liable for the safekeeping of such Federal Reserve notes, gold certificates, special drawing rights certificates, and lawful money. Nothing herein contained, however, shall be construed to prohibit a Federal Reserve agent from depositing gold certificates and special drawing rights certificates with the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, to be held by such board subject to his order, or with the Treasurer of the United States for the purposes authorized by law. Number 8, engraving of plates, denominations, and form of notes. In order to furnish suitable notes for circulation as Federal Reserve notes, the Secretary of Treasury shall cause plates and dies to be engraved in the best manner to guard against counterfeits and fraudulent alterations, and shall have printed therefrom and numbered such quantities of such notes of the denominations of $1, $2, $5, $10, $20, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, as may be required to supply the Federal Reserve Banks. Such notes shall be in form and tenure as directed by the Secretary of Treasury under the provisions of this act and shall bear the distinctive numbers of the several Federal Reserve Banks through which they are issued. You know what's really interesting? I personally never seen a 5,000 or 10,000 or 1,000. I didn't even know they still print them. I want to say have not seen recently, I guess if that makes sense, because I've seen what they look like in the past, anyways, let me continue. Just a thought that came into mind. Again, for those of you just joining, we are reading the Federal Reserve Act, Section 16, and we are at number 9 right now. Custody of unissued notes. When such notes have been prepared, the notes shall be delivered to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, subject to the order of the Secretary of Treasury for the delivery of such notes in accordance with this act. Number 10. Custody of plates and dies, expenses of issue and retirement of notes. The plates and dies to be procured by the Secretary of the Treasury for the printing of such circulating notes shall remain under his control and direction, and the expenses necessarily incurred in executing the laws relating to the procuring of such notes and all other expenses incidental to their issue and retirement shall be paid by the Federal Reserve Banks, and the Board of Governors under the Federal Reserve System shall include in the estimate of expenses levied against the Federal Reserve Banks as a sufficient amount to cover the expenses herein provided for. Number 11. Examinations of plates, dies, etc. The Secretary of Treasury may examine the plates, dies, bed pieces, and other material used in the printing of the Federal Reserve notes and issue regulations relating to such examinations. Number 12. Appropriation for engraving, etc. Any appropriation heretofore made out of the general funds of the Treasury for engraving plates and dies, the purchase of the distinctive paper, or to cover any other expense in connection with the printing of national banknotes or notes provided for by Act of May 30th, 1908, and any distinctive paper that may be on hand at the time of the passage of this act may be used in discretion of the Secretary for the purposes of this act, and should the appropriations heretofore made be sufficient to meet the requirements of this act, in addition to circulating notes provided for by existing law, the Secretary is hereby authorized to use so much of any funds in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated for the purpose of furnishing the notes aforesaid, provided, however, that nothing in this section contained shall be construed as exempting national banks or Federal Reserve banks from their liability to reimburse the United States for any expenses incurred in printing and issuing circulating notes. Now there's a part that says omitted, but since it's been omitted, don't worry about it, because I'm sure this is the first time you guys are reading about this anyways. Or hearing, so. Number 13, checks and drafts to be received on deposit at par. Every Federal Reserve Bank shall receive on deposit at par from depository institutions or from Federal Reserve Banks checks and other items, including negotiable orders of withdrawal and share drafts and drafts upon any of its depositors, and when remitted by a Federal Reserve Bank, checks and other items, including negotiable orders of withdrawal and share drafts and drafts drawn by any depositor in any other Federal Reserve Bank or depository institution upon funds to the credit of said depositor in said bank or depository institution. Nothing herein contained shall be construed as prohibiting a depository institution from charging its actual expense incurred in collecting and remitting funds, or for exchange sold to its patrons. The Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System shall, by rule, fix the charges to be collected by the depository institutions from its patrons, whose checks and other items, including negotiable orders of withdrawal and share drafts, are cleared through the Federal Reserve Bank, and the charge which may be imposed for the service of clearing or collection rendered by the Federal Reserve Bank. Number 14, transfer of funds among Federal Reserve banks. The Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System shall make the promulgate. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that improperly. Promulgate. Sorry again. It's spelled PROMULGATE. I definitely have to look that word up in a few minutes. I'm going to screenshot that to do that in a few minutes because I want to know what that word means. I really do. Maybe I should just do it right now. Let's do that real quick. No, because all right. Anyways, in a few minutes when I'm done, I'll definitely will look that word up. I'm very interested to see what that word means. So, from time to time, regulations governing the transfer of funds and charges, therefore, among Federal Reserve banks and their branches, and may at its discretion exercise the functions of a clearinghouse for such Federal Reserve banks, or may designate a Federal Reserve Bank to exercise such functions, and may also require each such bank to exercise the functions of a clearinghouse for depository institutions. Number 15. Again, for anyone that's just joining right now, I'm reading the Federal Reserve Act, Section 16. We're at number 15 right now. Number 15, Settlement Fund. The Secretary of Treasury is hereby authorized and directed to receive deposits of gold or of gold certificates or of special drawing rights certificates with the Treasurer or any Assistant Treasurer of the United States when tendered by any Federal Reserve Bank or Federal Reserve agent for credit to its or his account with the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. The Secretary shall prescribe by regulation the form of receipt to be issued by the Treasurer or Assistant Treasurer to the Federal Reserve Bank or Federal Reserve agent making the deposit, and a duplicate of such receipt shall be delivered to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System by the Treasurer at Washington upon proper advices from any Assistant Treasurer that such deposit has been made. Deposits so made shall be held subject to the orders of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, and deposits of gold or gold certificates shall be payable in gold certificates, and deposits of special drawing rights certificates shall be payable in special drawing rights certificates on the order of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System to any Federal Reserve Bank or Federal Reserve agent at the Treasury or at the Sub-Treasury of the United States nearest the place of business of such Federal Reserve Bank or such Federal Reserve agent. The order used by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System in making such payments shall be signed by the chairman or vice chairman or such other officers or members of the board may by regulation prescribe. The form of such order shall be approved by the Secretary of Treasury. Number 16, expenses. The expenses necessarily incurred in carrying out these provisions, including the cost of the certificates or receipts issued for the deposits received, and all expenses incident to the handling of such deposits shall be paid by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and included in its assessments against the several Federal Reserve banks. 17. Preservation of provisions of the Act of March 14, 1900. Nothing in this section shall be construed as amending Section 16. Construed as amending Section 6 of the Act of March 14th, 1900, as amended by the Acts of March 4th, 1900, and 7 March 2nd, 1911, and June 12th, 1916, nor shall the provisions of this section be construed to apply to the deposits made or to the receipts or certificates issued under those acts. And that's the section 16 of the Federal Reserve Act. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly read that. I mean, I know I kind of went quickly. I've read it before, obviously, but it's good to really reread these things over and over and over so they make sense to you, because, you know, it's quite unfortunate that, I mean, they don't teach financial literacy, you know, or financial education in schools. But it's very important because, you know, it's like up until me being like literally about 34 years old, I never even read the fucking Federal Reserve Act ever, you know? So better, I guess, sooner than never. And it's just, again, it's really important to have financial education, especially because the way we're taught in like public education schools is absolutely wrong. It's absurd, and what a waste of time public education is, really, because they literally, the way that they taught us in school, like about, I mean, they really didn't teach financial literacy, but it's all backwards. I can't even tell you. And I'm not going to go into that right now. This conversation was more so of just reading, and that's all. I usually go live on Instagram, but I do like that TikTok allows me to save my videos later after they're uploaded, so I figured why not. Anyways, guys, that's all for tonight. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening, day, wherever you're at. God bless and take care. Talk to you guys later.